our main topic today is nitrogen fixing plants. And Rachel came up with this idea because she's dealing with some nitrogen fixing plants.
We were thinking about an idea last week, trying to think of an idea for this week, and I was transplanting some sea buckthorn
Mhm,
seeds that I got. I'm not even sure it was a Etsy purchase off of
mhm.
somewhere out of Alaska. And so I thought if they did well in Alaska, they're going to do fine here. So I bought these seeds not anticipating that they would do exceptionally well, and every single seed sprouted.
That is
So I
great.
have 25 sea buckthorn, little baby sea buckthorn plants that are probably, I don't know, they're probably about 8 inches tall now. So I was transplanting those and I'm like, you know what? These are nitrogen fixers. We should do a
Mhm.
podcast on nitrogen fixers.
Yeah, definitely.
So
It's one of many that we'll talk about today, and there's more, of course, that we'll
there's so many.
probably bring up. But it surprises me to find out, though, there is a little bit of misconception on what some people call some nitrogen fixing plants.
Yeah.
And because doing some research, I thought a few were because I've heard so many people talk about them to find out technically they're not in the same way. They're not.
Okay.
So
It'll
we'll
be
talk
interesting to
about
see
that
what
when we
you
get to
came up
that.
with.
Yeah. But as a person who really likes to build guilds, one of the things I like to include in a guild is
Right.
at least one nitrogen fixing plant of some kind.
Yeah.
Generally, I like to include some nitrogen fixing. Of course, I want to include some dynamic accumulators. I want, of course,
Yes.
ground covers. And some of those plants are all three of those things. So it's nice if you can even make multitask with a certain plant, even.
Most of them have something you can eat too.
Yeah, eat or feed your garden with them, or
Yep.
just or feed your animals with them, your livestock with them.
Or
Yeah, there's a lot of
medicinal.
different
Yeah.
medicinal, yeah, all kinds of things. Yeah, there's some different ways to look at that. So because I like permaculture, because I like building guilds, because I like build I'm really into sustainable or even regenerative agriculture. I
Right.
think that nitrogen fixing plants play a big part in that. So it's nice to consider them and really understand them and how they work in conjunction with your other plants. But what makes these plants nitrogen fixing plants is the fact that they can convert atmospheric nitrogen into a form that's usable by the plants.
So I it's in the air and then
Yeah,
the plants put it down into the soil through their roots.
yeah. And though they actually they'll develop these nodules.
Nodulus?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was looking for the word nodules on their roots.
Nodule?
And yeah, it's a bacteria. And now there's some
Yeah.
different kind. There's rhizobia. Now I did a little more research in that. There's actually another kind too, and I'd have to look it up. There's actually another, like the alder trees don't do rhizobia. They actually produce a different kind of bacteria. And
Oh,
they're a
okay.
nitrogen fixing tree also. But
I
so there's
did
a
not
couple
know they
different
were.
kinds of
Interesting.
bacteria. Yeah, there's a couple different kinds of bacteria, but most commonly it's the rhizobia
Okay.
bacteria and these nodules. And yeah, they'll convert into ammonia, and then it makes it so other plants can absorb and use that nitrogen. So it's a cool process, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
cool
like
that
this
some plants
exchange
do
that
that.
happens in the soil between plants. It's really
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah. Of course, feed if you can actually get plants to put nitrogen into your soil, you don't have to use any kind of synthetic nitrogen
Exactly.
or even just any kind of fertilizer or anything that for nitrogen. So
Right,
it's
and those plants probably, if it's anything like human nutrition, your body takes up that stuff way better when it's actually a food than a synthetic, and
yeah.
it's the same way with plants. When it's a plant feeding another plant, it's gonna take it up so much better than when you're using a chemical fertilizer.
Yeah, and even if you don't believe that, there's still a lot of reasons to go that route because you get more than just the nitrogen from that tree. There's biodiversity and
Right,
habitat and usually food
right,
or medicinal or whatever other purposes those feed. So it has multiple purposes even beyond that nitrogen. It
and you don't have to pay for it
Yeah,
every
you
year.
have to pay for it. Exactly. Yeah, so it's so much better on so many levels to get that nitrogen that way than it is to feed it. Now, some people will say, "I don't need nitrogen fixing plants because I have animals. I have all the nitrogen and that manure I need." Yeah, you can go that route and it will supply a ton of nitrogen, but I still think that you can get so much more from those plants other than just the nitrogen. So they're still
Well, yeah.
beneficial in those having.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, we talked
compost.
about that.
Yeah, good compost and good manure. Obviously, you're going to have plenty of nitrogen to feed your soil with, but there's other benefits as well. So I
Yeah,
think
all those
it's a good idea.
medicinal benefits, and the plant puts out some of these plants put out fruit or leaves that are edible,
Yeah.
either by us or by animals that we're raising. So there's multiple that's what's so nice about guilds and about permaculture is all that function stacking.
Yeah.
Nothing serves just one purpose. And when you use a chemical fertilizer, and I know some people have to, it's not our favorite thing, but it only serves one purpose. But when you use a plant that does that, it serves so many purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and I also want to say that when we're talking about nitrogen fixing plants, we are referring to the ones who actually put off these bacteria nodules on their roots. But most plants, and some better than others, are nitrogen fixing in different ways, and generally in the realm of leaf litter or
Yeah,
chop and
true.
drop. You can
Yeah,
feed your soil a ton of nitrogen with chop and drop and leaf litter from these trees and other plants. So it's not that they can't supply nitrogen, it's just that what's considered these nitrogen fixing plants do it through the root system. And it's
right.
probably a quicker process of conversion to a usable nitrogen than the breakdown from the top down going down through the soil. So it actually gets it quicker to the plants and more usable quicker to the plants. So that's what makes them nitrogen fixing in that way. And I say this because we want, as we jump into some of these best nitrogen fixing plants, one that's so common if we look at trees is black locust.
Yeah, that's very
Okay.
common.
And it's nitrogen fixing, it puts the root nodules off. But so many people will actually consider honey locust nitrogen fixing as well, but it does not do that.
It doesn't. Okay, because I actually put it on the list.
I had it
It
on the list too,
doesn't.
and then I did some research and I found a couple blogs who said it did, but then I got into some studies with some colleges and things, and it was like, "No, it does not."
So
And
only for the leaves, it doesn't have
it
nodules
just
on
does
it.
a lot of dry it's rich in its
Okay,
leaves, it's rich in its the pods and things like that, and it drops and they decay, so it has a lot of nitrogen supplication that way through the litter,
but not
but
through its
not through the nodules from what I everything I could
interesting.
find on a
Okay.
few studies I seen. Yeah,
Um,
so yeah, again, so black locust would actually be the better one of those if you're
okay.
looking for some.
And
A lot of people are referring to that, and I think there is some misinformation out there on it, but I was
well, yeah,
trying to find some really good studies on it, and I probably should have put some of those links in that I found because
you should have.
yeah, I might go back and look them up and include those in the show notes because, yeah, it looks as though I'm not a scientist, don't even pretend one on to be one on the podcast, but people smarter than me who are doing these studies are saying, "No, it does not have the modules."
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense because black locust does seem to be the one more commonly used for that.
Nice.
And it'll grow in most of the continental US. Black locust is it's universal.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think that grows as a perennial. It grows up here,
yeah,
and I'm grow zone
down in
I know it
Texas,
links goes to 4, grow zone
yeah.
4. I'm not sure about 3.
Yeah,
I think the
I don't
United
know if you
States
can grow
does
it up in
have
Alaska or something like that, but I know in
yeah,
the continental US, you could probably grow it in most of the US. Probably couldn't grow it in some of the desert areas or maybe some
right,
of the super cold areas, but
right.
other than that, I'm sure it would grow most places in the US.
Yeah.
So it's a great one. I was watching a video where a guy was planting black locust right in the same ring with some other plants. Like he had an apple tree and he's planting black locust and he was just keep coppicing that black locust every time it would get starting to interfere with the apple tree. He'd chop it. And he had some in the rings where apple trees weren't planted with them. And the black locust tree was literally twice the size, or the apple tree was literally twice the size of the apple trees that didn't have the black locust next
Well, I guess I'm gonna have to find myself some black locusts because I have
to it.
honey locusts
Yeah, and
started.
he just kept coppicing them every time they started interfering with the tree because 'cause they'll just keep coming
Yeah,
back. They're really good
and
about that.
those if you coppice them small, they wouldn't be as hard to cut down. They're known for
Right.
being very hard on
Yeah.
a saw blade or something.
Yeah, and he's just
They
going
work great posts
yeah.
or
It'd get
woodworking type stuff.
5, 6 feet tall where that apple tree was like 8 feet tall. He'd just go in and chop it at about 6 feet and cut it back down to a foot or whatever, let it grow back up again, just keep feeding that.
Yeah,
And what's cool about that is the way that these nodules are released are generally because the roots prune themselves back and die. So when you coppice something, the roots actually self-prune and it will release those nodules. So it's actually a better process for releasing those nodules. And because that's
very
as we're
cool.
gonna get into, we're gonna talk about legumes and things later, and that's exactly what you have to do with those to get them to release
Yeah,
the nodules. So black locust, again, it's actually better if you would coppice it or pollard it to get it to self prune those roots and
right.
release.
And when you
Uh,
say coppice, you're talking about basically cutting just above its shoulder above the soil,
A
and
stool
pollard
cutting. Yeah, like a
yeah,
stool.
and then the
Yeah.
pollard is up higher. Both of those are old school techniques.
Mhm.
People use them for firewood, for all sorts of things,
Yeah.
and
Some
it's
trees will
yeah,
not tolerate a
right.
coppice because it would just kill them.
But
Black
locust
locust will.
certainly would.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and they're such a great wood, overall wood. They're a very hard wood, so anything you would use for a hard wood, you could use.
It's just useful in so many ways. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
gonna be able to use that wood for other things because it is such a great wood too. So it's great to have. I guess what I'm saying here, even though it's a tree, doesn't mean it has to be some overstory tree.
yeah.
You could actually coppice it down, keep it low, let like an apple tree be your overstory tree if you want it to be.
Yeah, you could make
And
it be more like a bush.
yeah, and still use that as your nitrogen fixer. So it just because the tree doesn't mean it couldn't serve a lower
So
purpose, you know, lower in the
this next tree is more of a bush, and people have
yeah.
love-hate relationships with it.
As they probably should, because in
Yeah,
certain areas it can be very
taken over a
yeah.
lot of places here. Yep,
Autumn olive is what we're talking
yep.
about. And autumn olive it's got a lot of great qualities. Again, it's a nitrogen fixer. It puts off an edible fruit.
Little tiny
So I mean,
berries.
yeah, yeah. It's really good in so many ways, but it's very invasive. It will spread.
Yep.
And believe it or not, I did find this out about autumn olive. It's actually allelopathic,
Oh, I did
slight
not know that.
slightly. So it does the reason it spreads is because it actually will basically prevent some of its competition from taking
Oh, yes,
over
I
through
did
that.
actually know that. It
Yeah.
kills off things around it,
So
puts
certain
out
plants you probably
chemicals.
wouldn't plant, around it. It ain't quite as bad as like walnut and what it
Right,
puts off, but it does put off a small amount of it, and things like your nightshades and things would actually be greatly affected by that. So you wouldn't wanna be trying to grow like peppers or tomatoes in a guild with autumn olive because those are greatly
right.
affected by that, but some plants not at all, obviously.
And those are
So
another one you can cut and they'll come back.
yes,
You
yeah.
cannot really, it's pretty hard to hurt them.
But people also they hear that allopathic and about it, and they're like, "Oh, you would never wanna plant that then." Do you know sunflowers are also that? Do you know elderberry are also that? A lot of plants are that to a certain extent. It's just we
Yes.
think about walnut as being like this worst one, and you definitely
Yeah.
things around a walnut.
Walnuts have
The
and there's
juggalo.
even certain breeds of
Yeah.
walnuts that don't have it as bad as other
Yeah, the
breeds.
English walnuts aren't as bad as like the black walnut. Yeah. But yeah, again, so yeah, it's not to the level of that. So there's a lot of things that will grow near these things. Like I got elderberry in all my guilds, and it doesn't affect anything from growing. And yet
Yeah.
it's
Do you
slightly
have autumn olive? We have some at our
no,
property.
I would
We're
say an elderberry I have
okay.
in everything, and it's also slightly allopathic, and
We're
it does
trying to keep our autumn olive under control
yeah, I don't
before it
have any
spreads.
here. I don't have any autumn olive. We have
Yeah.
some that's wild, but I don't have any on my property.
Yeah, we
Um,
have it on our property. Not a ton of it yet. We're trying to avoid getting a ton of it.
yeah, and it'll grow in the eastern, northeast, Midwest US. It'll grow all across there really good. You might be able to create microclimates where it'll survive in most of the United States, but I think that up in these parts, it's just wild. It just it's pretty invasive in some situations. One we don't have to deal with, but it's a great plant is mimosa.
I'm trying to picture what it looks like because I
Very,
don't have it here.
nutritious, very fast growing. Yeah, yeah. So it's got a lot of benefits. So Southern US is growing mimosa.
All I can think of is the alcoholic drink. I don't even
Alder
know what's in it because 'cause I've never had one,
yeah,
but
I
that
don't know.
when you're saying that, that's all I'm thinking.
Now, alder is one that's very common in Europe for being a nitrogen fixing plant and some other places too. It grows in the Northwest US, pretty common. I think you can grow it a lot of places, but you're forcing it. It's not
Yeah, I
something
don't
that
think we
grow.
have it here.
No, we don't have it here
Yeah,
either.
yeah.
But it's and now I was mentioning earlier that like alder has a different bacteria. It doesn't it has it's different in how it works, but the same, different but the same. So it does work, but it's a really common one, but it's not one that you or I are probably gonna go to as
Right.
one
But
that
if we
we're
have
gonna
people that are listening in the Northwest, they
yeah,
would
it is one that grows
use
there.
it. Yeah.
And again, another one that we're not gonna use here is mesquite because that's more of
Yeah,
Southwest
same
US.
thing. Yep.
But it's one that it's a nitrogen fixer as well.
I
So
did
there
not realize that was a nitrogen fixer.
I didn't either until I just started doing a little research on some nitrogen fixing trees, and it's one of
Interesting.
them. And it does have the nodules as well. So there's some trees. There might be more. There are more. I've seen
Oh,
others
I'm sure there is.
that will not grow here. They're more like Australia or Asia or other places. Yeah. So there's a few there. Now, of course, there's this line you cross where shrub or tree. Was autumn olive a shrub or a tree? Some
Did
people
you
would call it a
find out
shrub. Some people call it a tree.
did you find out that redbud is not really a nitrogen fixer? Because I have heard that it is, but it's not on here,
It
and I
was on there.
saw it on
I
here
remember
earlier.
because, again, it's a leaf litter tree that people
Okay,
would
I was gonna say,
consider.
I swear you had that on
I
here.
did have it on the list and I removed it because I did more research and it does not produce the nodules,
Interesting.
but people consider it a nitrogen tree because the leaf litter is heavy in nitrogen.
Okay, okay, 'cause the red bud the bud part of it is
Yep.
actually also edible, people make jelly out
Yep.
of it, but
It
it's
so it's
not
one of them you
technically
could plant as a nitrogen fixer and use the leaf litter and use it as chop and
okay,
drop and but it's not one that does it through the
through
roots.
the nodules, okay.
Yep, through the nodules. So it's not like a so, yeah,
I was like,
according
"Man, I'm
according to
losing
everything
it.
I was
I
studying.
swear it was on here. I swear it was
Yep,
on here."
it was, you're right. And there were some others that I actually included that I found out that they weren't as well, and I
Right?
was like, "Wow." So, I'm trying to be accurate on that because I that's actually something I didn't know. I hear so many of those being referred
Yeah.
to as nitrogen fixers,
I
but
had
then to
honey
find
locust
out
on here, and I just deleted it
yeah,
because I thought honey locust was
yeah, yep. Shrubs. Now, like, again, we're across the line between trees and shrubs. Is autumn olive a tree or a shrub? Is sea
yeah.
buckthorn a tree or a shrub? We're gonna call these I call those trees,
Well,
I call these
sea
shrubs. We'll
buckthorn,
put
I
sea
don't think gets
buckthorn
nearly as tall as a tree. Those don't get
right.
huge.
And autumn olive, what, 8 feet probably? They don't get real
I've
big,
seen
10 feet.
some really big
Oh,
ones
have you? Okay,
recently,
I always
like
see them in, like,
10
shrub
feet.
forms.
I can't remember where I was, but I said to somebody when we were walking, I said, "Is that an autumn olive?" Because 'Cause I'd never seen one that tall. It
Yeah.
was big.
Most of them I
Usu
see are probably in the 8 or 10 feet range.
That's what
Shrubs, yeah.
yeah, most what we see are, like, 8 feet about.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd never seen one. This one was probably 12. I'd
What's the
never seen
biggest sea
one that big.
buckthorn you ever seen?
I've never actually seen one in person. The only reason I know about them is Ben Falk talks
I
about
have
them all the time.
I have one that I purchased 2 years ago.
You?
It's about 5 feet tall, so it's not very
Okay.
big.
Have you
Um,
gotten any berries off of it?
yeah, handful. Yeah,
'Cause I'm
handful.
about to have 25
I have,
25 of
but
them.
I collected those and I'm drying them out because I'm trying to I wanna plant more. I wanna get some seeds
Right.
going and try to plant some more, so I'd like to have some more of those.
They're supposed
But
to be so good for you, and then
yeah,
the nitrogen fixing, so that's why I got them because it's really hard to get omegas without eating lots of fish, and
yeah.
apparently sea buckthorn has lots of omegas in it.
Doesn't purslane also have that?
Yeah, it has
So I
some.
think
Yep.
purslane is one that you could also eat, is another plant you could eat
Yeah.
that would replace
I
the
think
omegas.
that sea buckthorn is one of the heaviest plants or the one of one of the only plants that are really heavy in omega-9,
Okay.
and I'm not sure is it omega-3s that
I'm not real sure, but yeah, that
I'm not
I
sure
just know
either.
that it's one of the few plants, also purslane being one of the few
Yep.
plants that have you can get omega.
So, eating both of those could be very healthy.
Yeah. Buckthorn definitely grows in the northern zones really
Yeah,
well.
when it's
It but
cooler.
it's pretty hardy and it can grow in most of the continental US as well. A lot of people I've heard people down in Texas growing the sea
Okay.
berries as well and stuff. Just I guess you might need some protection because it does
From the
seem to like
heat.
the cooler climates a
Yeah.
little bit better, but I think it can be grown in a lot of places. So it's a pretty universal one. One I've never grown, but I've heard a lot of people that really like it is the Siberian pea shrub. Have
I
you
was
heard
gonna
about that
ask
one?
you if you had, 'cause
No, I've never seen it
have
even, but I know people I've heard people talk about it, and it grows, like, in the northern plains over to the northwest United
well, it
States.
likes cold.
Yeah, that temperate climate up there
Cold,
that
arid.
like yeah.
I don't know if it would grow here, 'cause
It
so
might.
I get cold, but it seems like the Northwest, depending on where in the
Yeah,
Northwest,
it's
like
like
it
pretty wet. I don't know how far you go northwest because it gets
right,
pretty
yeah, if
wet.
we're talking like
Yeah,
Seattle, it's wet, but if we're
yeah,
talking like the Northern Plains, that's arid.
yeah,
So,
yeah. So I'm not
yeah.
sure how far over it actually goes, but yeah, it's a really good one for that as well. If you live in that area, it might be one you can take advantage of also. And one that I am just purchased some gumi seeds, so gomi seeds or whatever you want to call it, gomi or gumi,
Okay, I've heard about this,
gumi
but I have
bushes,
no idea
and it
what it
will
looks
grow in
like.
most of the continental US as well. And I don't have it. I want it really bad. So I just recently purchased some seeds, but they're not
Okay.
going to ship them until late June, early August.
So what do they look like? Because 'Cause I've heard of it,
I've
but I
seen
don't
seen
I
them on
never asked.
videos. Yeah, it's
Okay.
just a little round berry in the tree is I would think it's something similar to sea buckthorn and it's
Okay.
the way it looks, I think.
Like
Um,
4 to 6 feet tall.
Yeah, I would say in that range from what I've
Okay.
seen. Now, I've only just watched a couple of videos on him, and actually Edible Acres, he's doing a lot of work with
All
them right
right.
now, and I've seen him talking a lot about them, and he's propagating a bunch of seeds from his plants,
Nice.
and I was watching some stuff he was doing, and, yeah, I don't know a lot about them other than I really want them.
I'm hoping that a lot of these are also very good, maybe possibly some fodder trees, maybe not for
Mhm.
all animals, but maybe rabbits or goats could eat some of them. That's what my hope is.
Yeah, and one that if you got say you got some guilds out in your front yard like I do, and you want something really pretty out there, it's got some pretty flowers, wisteria.
Those are so pretty.
Yeah, and they're an actual nitrogen fixer,
I did not know that, and I
and
always thought they were beautiful, so I might get
yeah,
look at them.
I was even watching a video that said the flowers were edible, and I didn't even know that.
They
Now, most
are.
plant is toxic, but the flower petals are actually edible. But yeah, they're nitrogen fixers. So to put one of them in a guild to
Per
have to add a little bit of beauty to your guild, awesome. So wisteria, I have one planted here, and I'm excited
Yeah.
about it now. I was
You
just had it in the
have
shower.
when you have a suburban or an urban homestead and you have to worry about aesthetics and keeping neighbors
Uh-huh.
happy and the city happy, it's nice to find stuff like wisteria that
Yeah.
is nitrogen fixing, parts of it are edible. You mix that with maybe some of these other sea buckthorn that looks like a bush, nobody ever will know it's edible.
Well, and they can get really big, but they can
Yeah,
handle being pruned pretty
right.
aggressively very well, and you can even slap them up against a trellis and kinda tie them back away from everything else if you want to give more things room to grow or whatever. So they're usable in a
Yeah,
space where you're
and
gonna
a
put a
lot of
lot of
these,
other
you can
things.
use them in a suburban setting or an
Mhm.
urban setting, and they still look pleasing to the eye so people don't get upset with you.
Yeah, so I wanted to include that one in there as this not thing that you don't think of as being something, like, super useful in a lot of ways, but yet it's another use that it
You might
has.
be able to make a tea or some
There
jelly
you
out of
go.
those
There
flowers,
you go.
though.
There you go. Yeah, that's like our there's probably a few others we didn't include, of course, in the trees
Mhm.
and shrubs, but those are some pretty common ones that a lot of people refer to that I think can be really useful on a small homestead, and you can use them in your guilds or along by the edge of a garden or something like that just to have them. Now, again, there's a bunch that are considered nitrogen fixing, but because of the tree litter and I think they're still usable and they're usable
Right.
in that way. I just think it
They're
probably
just not
takes
gonna fix as much.
I don't think it's gonna fix it as quickly and maybe not just not as put off as much into the soil,
Right,
you
yeah, and
know?
as regularly because the leaves only fall once a year.
Yeah.
Those
Well,
roots are always there.
of course, now that brings us to the herbaceous plants,
Yeah.
and we're gonna mention a few here. You're gonna hear a lot of people refer to as comfrey as a nitrogen fixer, but again, not because of nodules. People refer to it as a
Yeah.
nitrogen fixing because you just mentioned what made me think of that right off the bat was because people once a year. Not with comfort, you could take several cuttings a year of a
True,
lot of leaves
true.
and lay 'em down, let them break down. They break down really quick. So in that sense, they are nitrogen fixing. They
Yeah,
have
I
a lot
think
of
of
nitrogen.
comfrey as more of a dynamic
It
accumulator,
is.
like a
It's
seed
exactly what it is.
cat
And it
fruit.
does have a high nitrogen count, but
Yeah,
you're just letting them leaves break down. Again, that's gonna have to work down through the soil. You could rototill it or dig it into the soil to make it go quicker, feed that soil quicker. But I'm not big on that. You're breaking up your soil food web and stuff. So it's better just break from the top down. Even though it does break down really quickly, I still think it's not going to be as good as anything that's so it doesn't make the list as a nitrogen fixer in that sense. Even though I use it for that like crazy in my garden. I lay it all over my garden around all my plants
yeah, I
it
just did that
as a
too.
nitrogen fixer. I
Yeah.
do. But it's just a different type of nitrogen fixer, not a quick nitrogen fixer. Red clover probably in the herbaceous plants is probably one that a lot of people would think of.
So common.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a common cover crop
It's
that fixes
affordable to buy.
Yep, exactly, and it serves purposes. It's a useful plant, and it's a great ground cover in the sense that it will,
Mhm.
it will keep back the weeds and things too. Not as great as the other one that we'll mention in down below in actual ground covers, but red clover is a really good one. Vetch is really common. For me, it's hairy vetch. That's one I
Yeah,
like.
we have it wild at our property.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and it
That
can
fruit's
it can be invasive, but when
yes.
it's used as a cover crop, if you're getting rid of it before it goes to seed and all that kind of stuff as a cover crop, it's an excellent cover crop that will put off a lot of, nitrogen into your soil. So, again,
Yeah.
it's one that's very common, and then actually, when you're breaking it down and you start chopping, because 'cause you're gonna wanna work that into the soil or lay it on the soil, not only is it good for the nitrogen, but it's also really good for the soil structure because it's a cover crop. So it's gonna do a lot
Right.
for that too, and
Yeah.
other fertilities as well. It's actually just because it's a biomass, it's gonna break down really heavily.
And you're
Again,
keeping that soil covered.
yeah.
So
So
this works really well, like, actually in your garden where the other ones work a little bit better maybe in guilds.
mhm.
Yep.
And yeah, so it's yeah, there's a few cover crops, but I like vetch. It's just one that's because it feeds the soil really good. It's a good one to use. Again, if you're looking for something really to beautify your guilds
Oh,
and
yeah,
maybe
they're
like I said in the
super
front,
pretty.
lupins. Yeah. Lupins
Yeah.
are a beautiful flower. They got the tall flower. They get like a bunch of little
I
flowers, but it
tried
goes really
growing some
tall.
this year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're it's you can go down to Walmart and buy them. They're
They're
just
so
people
pretty.
every place sells them, and you can actually put those into your guilds, bring it a level of beauty, and feed your soil with them. They are a
Right.
nitrogen fixer. They have the
Yeah.
nodules as well. So I love stuff like that. That'll serve a purpose plus add some, visual appeal to your guilds and to your front of your property or whatever. So
Now
I
you
love
have me questioning whether the next one is technically a nitrogen fixer, but I'm pretty sure it is the fenugreek, and I hope I'm saying that
yeah, I don't know anything about it. So tell me
Oh, I it's a really pretty bright yellow flower, and so your best if you're gonna pick to use the flower, you should pick it before it goes to seed, but it's the same thing, it's a really pretty bright yellow flower. You can use the seeds medicinally, but it does fix nitrogen into the soil, and you can do the same thing, it can die back right into the soil, and it's a pretty leafy plant, so you get a lot of biomass and such out of that to improve the soil. But
good
I
news,
just
Rachel.
got
It
you
is. It is a symbiotic nitrogen fixation by rhizobium, so it
yeah,
does have the
and I
nodules, so you're good.
I started using the fenugreek, and hopefully I'm saying that, a couple of months ago just for just the seeds. We've been sprouting those and putting them on our salad, but you can also grind the seeds, and it's got like a maybe a little bit of a licorice flavor. So anyways, I think I'm gonna try to grow some of those too because the plant itself is really pretty. It's a bright yellow flower with a lighter green leaf.
Mm,
So I might put some of that in my beds
nice.
this
Yeah, I gotta look into
yeah.
that. That sounds like a great one. I'm always looking for something that makes the beds look nicer because I have guilds right up in the front by the sidewalk in front of my house. I have a couple guilds up there. Anytime I can add flowers or anything up there or anything that has it just looks more decorative, I like that because it just gives something that appeal for the front yard, which I like. So I like looking for stuff like that.
Yeah, we have a berm in our front yard because we get a lot of dust from our we live on a dirt road even though we're suburban and not that far from town, our road is dirt. And we also needed to try to curtail the dogs from coming the neighborhood dogs would come into our garden off the road, and putting that berm in and planting it really heavily with plants, we have no problems with the dogs coming into the
Oh,
yard
nice.
anymore.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I like things that I don't have to replant over and over, so it's mostly perennials up there, but I like it to look nice.
Let's talk about a couple ground covers as well, because one of the things you'll do in a guild is throw down a bunch of mulch usually. But
Right.
if you could actually cover that soil with plants, that's even better. Still want to put some mulch around here and there, but plants do the same thing. If you can have a living mulch, that's even
True,
better.
true.
And white clover is a great ground cover. We have a lot of white clover here, and it just grows through my grass. It's just everywhere, and it works its way into the guilds and everything else. And I'm not upset about it. And it's a nitrogen fixer, and it's a perennial. So it just stays there. It just comes back and it just keeps on producing, and you don't have to replant nothing or put down any more seeds or anything like that. It just continues to grow. So I like having white clover. But yeah, it's a great one. It does and it's so low growing that it won't shade anything
Right,
out. I
yeah.
mean, it
Do you
gets
ever interplant in yours, like, in your garden?
what's that?
Do you ever interplant in yours in your
The
garden?
the white clover?
Yeah.
No, I don't
No?
I keep it out of the actual
Okay.
garden beds. I'd have it in the guilds, but I do keep it and I keep it around trees and everything else, but I don't really let it because it's a perennial, I really just don't like
Right.
it
Yeah.
spreading around through the garden bed, so I do keep it out of there. Another one is creeping red fescue. Now, I've never grown that, I've seen pictures of it,
I
it
was
looks
just gonna
really
say I
nice.
haven't grown that.
Yeah, it's used in lawns and meadows, and it too is a, nitrogen fixer and it improves the soil health. So it's one that's really low as well that just won't interfere with anything else, but yet will shade that ground, makes a nice living mulch.
I love those low ones, especially I think
Mhm.
if I could convince my husband to grow clovers instead of grass, that would be great.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't mind having a whole entire lawn of white clover
Right?
just because
Yeah.
yeah, it's feeding the soil and it's feeding the bees. You got that little flower and the bees are all
Right.
over it, crawling all over it. You'd
True.
hardly ever have to mow white clover by itself. I don't know if you'd ever really have to mow it. It stays really low. And a lot
Soft.
because in permaculture, a lot of people will use that as their pathways. They'll put down white clover in pathways instead of mulch or because one of the problems with mulch and gravel and things like that is weeds, right? It will get in
Yes.
there and take over. Where if you just fill it with white clover, it ain't gonna ever get very tall. You can walk
You know,
through it.
I
It's
I
never gonna
think
be
I
an
might
issue.
try that because the other problem we had with mulch was we get a ton of leaves because
Mhm,
we have a lot of trees, and so when you're trying to do leaf removal, it would blow the wood chips too,
mhm.
but it wouldn't if it was white clover, they'll just
Yeah, if you just
stay.
lay down heavy seed it with white clover seed and just let
I'm
it
gonna have to
kind
try
of
that in a
fill right
couple of
in.
areas
Yeah.
for huh,
But,
yeah,
just a thought, and then and you're feeding the soil, and especially if it's around your garden beds, your paths around your garden
right.
bed, it's just dumping nitrogen right into that soil. Well, it ain't like it's just staying directly under that. It's branching out and feeding the soil around it. That soil, there's an entire web in that soil working, and it's gonna go right through into your garden bed that
Yeah,
is
I love that, the soil food web.
yeah. So let's just again, we've been mentioning it as we go, but incorporating these nitrogen fixing plants into your permaculture garden, polyculture planting, obviously your guilds around your trees, around other plants. Anytime you can just form a polyculture and use these nitrogen fixing plants, which like I said, I don't like to just stick with the nitrogen fixing plants. I'm looking for dynamic accumulators.
Yep.
I'm looking for ground cover. I'm looking for the whole
Yeah.
spectrum of things to include in my all the layers and
Plants
all
that
the things.
attract bees, plants that
Yes.
detract bad bugs.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
Using the cover crops. We talked about vetch, but there's other ones as well, even clover. These are great cover crops. So when you start thinking about crop rotation, working your cover
Yeah.
crops in. So this is another way to use your these nitrogen fixing plants. Don't have them planted alongside your plants, having them planted when your plants aren't in there. In the fall, grow cover crops in there, nitrogen fixing cover crops. Take care of those before the year's up and the winter gets here, and then you plant your new garden in that the next year. Now you've dumped all that really nice nitrogen into your garden. Now, we didn't get into is some of the things like beans and peas and legumes, all the things
Yeah.
there that can also I don't even know why we didn't put those in the list. Obviously, those are good
I was gonna ask,
companion
did you
plants.
find out those weren't?
No, they
Because
absolutely are. All the
yeah.
legumes are. They actually are, and they do have the nodules as well. So a lot of people now, there's a big misconception, and I bought into this for many years now about the Three Sisters garden
Yeah.
and how you'll plant beans alongside your corn and the nitrogen will feed the corn. It does not work like that. It does not work like that. You can plant them there. They will
Right.
grow alongside them, but the nitrogen only gets released when that plant is chopped down. Preferably, and it will release even more nitrogen if you chop it down before it puts off the beans, because a lot of
Oh,
that nitrogen gets put back up into the beans.
that makes sense. That makes
So,
sense.
if you actually are gonna use it as a nit it's great to use it as a nitrogen fixer, but you wanna actually chop it before it puts off the beans, before it starts producing beans. So, you could do that.
Use it
And
as a crop. But yeah, I when you put it into your rotation, it can
yeah.
be really beneficial. So if you that's why you a lot of times will see farmers do their soybeans or their beans, and then the next year they do
Yeah.
corn.
Now there are getting the beans,
Yeah.
but there is still some nitrogen
Still
nodules
some.
in
Yep.
those roots. So, yeah, rotating it or even just having it there, yeah, and then something later, it's gonna produce it that way. So, it is a misconception because people think they can just plant it alongside as a companion plant, and it's gonna feed the nitrogen to that. Why, like I even said about the black locust, it will prune those roots, self-prune those roots when you coppice that and put off even more. It will
Wow,
produce some.
that's what is so cool about coppicing and
Yeah,
pollarding
yeah.
because of what it does, not just for the soil, but what it also does for the tree. It just lets the trees age too. It's
Mhm.
crazy,
S
all that.
and it's a lot of these are annual plants and flowers and things like that, so when they die back in the fall or even perennials that die back in the fall and then come back, when they die back, it's releasing those nodules, and so there's things like that happening. It's not when they're actually growing that it's actually putting off so much, it's actually the dieback with and the pruning back and things like that. And even with white clover, probably, I don't know this for a fact, but my assumption is that when you mow it, it chops it and it releases a lot of that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
So it would probably
probably.
do better to cut it back occasionally and keep it a little shorter.
That soil science is just such
Yeah,
a
yeah.
deep subject and so
I
fascinating.
could be wrong about that, but that's my
Right.
I assume that because of the way this works, because of the way these nodules will put off. But again, you don't ever wanna pull these beans and peas and things like that, legumes up by their roots. Always leave those in the
Yeah.
ground. Always chop them,
Cut them
leave
off.
them
Yep.
there because they will release those nodules and produce and leave not only the nitrogen, but also you just get that root breaking down into the soil for soil structure as well. So, yeah, that's how cover crops work. You're chopping them, they're releasing them, plus you're gonna get the heavy dieback of the nitrogen from the plant breaking down on the soil too for cover crops. So you get it from underneath and above feeding the
Right.
soil. So, of course, guild planting, is polyculture, but that's often used in guilds. And then just having like hedges and windbreaks and things. You can things like the Siberian pea shrub. I've seen a lot of people using them in like living fences. You could probably do the same thing with autumn olive. I think it would work really
Oh,
good.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Windbreak or something like that, and make a nice thick hedge with it. I think you could do it with sea berry and gomi, things like that as well.
Yeah, you
Um,
like, create a fedge,
yeah, a fedge hedge,
they call it, a
food
fedge
hedge.
hedge, where a food hedge.
Yes.
Yeah, you could do that, and you can do that with the bushes.
So, yeah, so that's just some of the ways you could use it in your garden, or use it in your guild, use it on your property to do the nitrogen fixing. That's the ways you wanna use some of that. Some tips for success: select the right species that will grow. Don't be trying to grow mesquite in Indiana. Okay, it
Yeah,
won't happen.
not
Use
gonna
something that's
happen.
gonna grow in your zone, obviously. So pick what's best for your climate, your soil conditions, what you need to make the best use of it. Consider what you're planting it with, proper planting. Don't if you're planning on letting something be an overstory tree, can think about what you're putting the plant under that. Is it
Right,
gonna shade out what you're trying to grow? If you're gonna keep it coppice back, just consider all the things because not everything can be cut back like a black locust and kept
right,
down low. So it might shade out other plants. Just pay attention to that. How learn about the maintenance of those plants. Can you cut them back? Can you pollard or coppice them? Can you heavily prune them? What do
and
they
how
need
big
to
they
grow?
get.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause autumn olive gets pretty big, pretty
Yeah.
nasty pickers on them too.
And when they're young, are they sensitive to drought and things? Are you gonna have to heavily
Right,
mulch these things in the beginning to retain some moisture and keep the weed pressure back so they get a good start and get established really well? It's just things like that you wanna consider, like with all plants and trees
and
and
when you're the
shrubs.
smaller your lot is, the more you're gonna wanna make sure that these will
Mhm.
work for your lot because you have to
Yeah.
think through those things. If they get 7 feet tall and they shade out your blueberry bushes or your apple trees, you're not gonna want those there, so you're gonna
Right,
wanna make
right.
sure.
So make sure it's something you can keep coppiced back or pruned back pretty heavily to let it so it doesn't interfere with those things. Because if I gotta pick between a black locust tree and my apple tree, I want the apple. I don't
Right,
want
yeah.
I'm not eating a lot of black puck.
You can put clover under your apple tree instead of the black locust by
That's
your
right, yeah.
apple
Just
tree.
yeah, you
Yeah,
have to consider these things. What's gonna work best for your situation, what you're trying to do. Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think that is where we're wanting to be with this. There's a lot of ways you can go about this. I think they're so worth having on your property in different areas like guilds, in the garden, along the side of the garden, around your trees. Just there's so much and also a lot of this stuff can be once you cut it, there's nitrogen in the leaves, especially when you're using the ones that are considered more the mulching,
Yeah,
like
like
leaf
the
litter
honey
ones. Those are
locust.
great to
Yeah.
put in your compost and things like that, or just chop and drop. Absolutely. There's a lot of trees that will fit that criteria as well. But for the purposes of this episode, we're talking about the ones that put off the
Do it
nodule,
through the yeah, the
yeah, through the
nodules.
roots and actually feed it underneath the soils. There's so many ways to go about it, but yeah, I think there's something to be said about plants that feed the soil in this way to make that nitrogen available quicker
And
and
there's so many more plants than what
yeah,
you mentioned and what the little bit that I mentioned.
yeah, yeah, you can do some
Yeah,
homework on
there's
that. We
so
can't
many
cover them
plants.
all. And like I said, a lot of them are, maybe not for certainly not for my zone, a lot of them. And there's a lot of tropical and subtropical plants,
Yeah.
but I know, and so I don't pay a lot of attention to those kind of plants because I can't grow a lot of those kind of plants. So anyway, that's what we have for you on that. I did want to recommend a couple books that are
These are
really
good books.
good
I have both
for
of these. I
nitrogen
really like
fixing
them.
information or soil information or just everything
Yeah.
guild and permaculture. One that jumps into a little bit now. The Living Soil Handbook by Jesse Frost, great book. I've recommended it many times. He definitely looks at everything from a market garden perspective.
Yes.
He's a market gardener. And so he's dealing with nitrogen fixing plants, but he's definitely doing it more from a crop rotation and covered
Yes.
crop point of view because he's doing market garden, right?
Mhm.
He's not talking about guilds and all that kind of stuff. But it is a great book. It's very practical.
I feel like it is also written so the beginner can understand it. I feel he
Absolutely.
does a wonderful job
He's got a
at
great
making
YouTube
it
channel too, by the way.
understanding. Yes, he does.
Yeah. But yeah, he's chapter 7 in that book is basically where he talks about nitrogen fixing plants. And like I said, generally it's more vetch and clover, things like the for more, but he does talk about it in that book. Now, probably the Bible on this is Edible Forest Gardens.
Yes.
And there's a 2-volume set by Dave Jackie. These books are
Right.
intense. Now,
This is
chapter
like a
5,
college course.
yeah, yeah, chapter 5 of volume 1 is where he really starts getting into he talks about the nitrogen fixing plants, but throughout both volumes, all the way through, it's referred to, it's talking about applying it in practice with these nitrogen fixing plants and guilds and the planting and just j it's just intertwined through both volumes. Yeah, if you want to know everything and then some about
Yeah.
forest gardens or forest food forests, these books are incredible. I've tried reading straight through them, and that's really difficult. I find them more better as a reference book and just hitting them when I'm like, I jumped on in there for this kind of stuff. But yes, so much
Yeah, I think the
information.
only way you could use those as something that you read just straight through is if you were approaching it as like a
Yeah,
self-taught college course.
yeah.
Like, you literally were just sitting there taking notes, trying to
Yeah, I
ingest it.
got about 3/4 through volume 1, which is the smaller of the 2 books,
Yeah.
and it was intense, and I'm gonna tell you what, it feels like a college course when you're reading it.
Yeah.
I was again, I'm a person who thought I knew a fair amount about food forest gardens until I read those books, and then I'm realizing that I don't.
I need to read them
I
again because I feel like I retained 10% of it. I
Oh,
actually only
yeah.
own volume 2. I need to buy volume 1, but I checked them both out from the library multiple times because I thought that I could check them out from the library, bring them home and read them. No, you
They're
can't.
they're they're expensive, they're, 90 buck dollar range, but I'm gonna
They're
tell you
expensive.
yeah,
Yes.
for the 2 volumes, but honestly, they're worth it. There's few books I could say that are worth that. Those
Yeah.
2 books are worth that. They absolutely are. So, anyway, those are my recommendations, Living Soil Handbook and Edible Forest Gardens 2-volume set. Great stuff if you're interested at all about soil health and guilds and planting and permaculture and
Yeah, and
yeah,
we
just
talk
good
a
stuff.
lot about permaculture. We both like permaculture. Not permaculture is it's permanent agriculture, and there's many aspects to it. We like it because once it's set up, it's ease of use. It's just there and it all works together in a relationship. And that's why we like it. A lot of people get into some of the other, like the politics and stuff about
Yeah.
permaculture, and there's a lot of aspects to it. When we talk about permaculture, we're talking more about the permanent agriculture stuff.
Yeah. When I think like a definition of permaculture, I think about design science,
Yep.
about creating a space, designing a space that provides food, it's environmentally friendly, that mimics nature,
Yeah.
that does all these things. When you use the phrase design science is exactly what that 2-volume set is. It's a very
Yes.
scientific book. It breaks when you get into all the everything about the soil, everything about the plants. It's just very deep. And it just uses all aspects of that design. Uh it teaches all aspects of it, not just the soil, not just but everything, the water,
Right.
everything, just anything you can imagine, it's in there. It's just a great
Yeah.
volume set. It's probably when it comes to permaculture, um,
It's probably right up there within the top
it's probably the top.
5. It
Now,
might even yeah.
there's some that are probably more practical. It's like when you're looking for stuff to actually
Yeah.
start getting out there. Like I mentioned in the last episode we done, that I think the permaculture handbook. I
Yeah.
think it's really good for these practical things. You can take that book and go out and do those things.
Yeah.
If you really want to understand why those things work, Edible Forest Gardens is better
Yeah,
to
this like you
understand
said, it's more
deeper,
like a
take it
reference
deeper.
book
Yeah, yeah, to
than
go
a
deeper
how-to
with it.
book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. So, anyway, I think that's all we have on this. We could have went so deep on this, but I think we let people just take it there from there and do their own study from there on out. But do you have anything else you want to add?
I think that's it. I feel like I you did a lot of the work in this one
Oh,
after I was the one that suggested the topic, but if
I just beat you to the notes. That's all.
you did. We're
Well,
on opposite schedules, so it's always interesting how the notes end up working.
yeah, folks. Until next time. Happy homesteading. God bless.
And grow your planted.